Give me, I want, he begged, his voice raw and trembling like a wounded animal. Clara froze, clutching the wooden spoon in her hand as the stranger stumbled through her doorway. He was covered in dust from the trail, his clothes torn, his face pale beneath layers of grime. The last light of sunset slanted through the cracks in her cabin, painting him in shades of red and gold. He looked like a ghost, half dead, half desperate. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Travelers came through these parts often, but never like this. Something in his tone, broken, pleading, stirred a strange ache inside her. He collapsed to his knees, hat falling to the floor with a dull thud. "Please," he gasped, "water, anything." The fire crackled softly, and Clara hesitated only a moment before filling a tin cup from the jug. She knelt beside him and pressed it into his trembling hands. He drank as if life itself were running down his throat, his Adam's apple rising and falling fast. When he finished, he looked up at her with eyes the color of a winter sky, piercing blue and full of storm. "You're safe here," Clara said gently, though she wasn't sure if it was true. The plains were cruel, and trust was a dangerous thing. But the man before her didn't look dangerous. He looked defeated. His lips parted, and for a heartbeat, he seemed to want to say something more, but only whispered again, "I want," before the words died in his throat. She fetched him bread and a small bowl of stew, the only meal she had left that day. He ate like a starving man, barely breathing between bites. Clara sat across from him, her eyes tracing the faint scar along his jaw. The roughness of his unshaven face, the expensive fabric of his torn shirt, that detail struck her. Those weren't rags from a farmhand. The stitching was fine, the color once rich. Whoever he was, he hadn't been poor for long. The stranger caught her looking and gave a weak smile. "Didn't mean to scare you," he murmured, voice hoarse. "Been riding for days. Lost my horse near the canyon." Clara nodded, still studying him. Something about him didn't add up. His hands, though dirty, were smooth, uncalloused. Not a worker's hands, not a drifter's either. But when his eyes met hers again, she saw no threat there, only exhaustion, sorrow, and gratitude. For now, that was enough. She nodded toward the empty cot by the fire. "You can rest here tonight," she said softly. He exhaled shakily, as though she had just handed him salvation. And as he lay down, whispering a quiet thank you, Clara had no idea that the man she'd just saved was far more than he seemed, and that her kindness had already changed the course of both their lives forever. The fire crackled softly as the stranger, now clean-faced and breathing steady, sat hunched. Over his bowl, Clara studied him from across the table, pretending to sew a patch on her skirt, but unable to stop glancing up. His every movement seemed cautious, as though he carried the weight of secrets too heavy to speak. The flames threw shadows across his face, highlighting the sharpness of his jaw and the weary hollows beneath his eyes. He looked like a man who had seen too much and lost even more. Outside, coyotes howled under the rising moon. The stranger flinched slightly, his spoon pausing mid-air. Clara noticed, her brows furrowing. "You act like someone's after you," she said quietly. Her tone wasn't accusing, just curious. He didn't look up right away, only stirred the stew as though searching for words at the bottom of the bowl. Finally his voice came low. "You ever run from something you can't outride?" Clara's heart skipped. She had once, when her father's debts forced her to sell the family farm, when she'd escaped men who saw poor women as property. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a slice of bread. He took it carefully, his fingers brushing hers just long enough to make her shiver. There was a gentleness in his touch that didn't belong to the wild prairie. He ate in silence, and when he was done, he leaned back with a sigh. "I'm sorry for barging in like that," he said, eyes flicking toward the door. "Didn't mean to cause trouble." Clara shook her head. "Ain't no trouble helping a man who's hungry," she replied softly. "But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't wondering who you really are." He smiled faintly, sadly. "No one worth remembering," he muttered. "Just a fool trying to find peace." But the words didn't convince her. The fine stitching on his coat, the faint scent of cologne even beneath the dirt, everything about him whispered of a life far beyond these plains. Clara wanted to press him for more, yet something told her to wait. She sensed he was fighting his own battle, a war between pride and confession. So instead she poured him another cup of water and said, "Well, whoever you are, you're safe here tonight." For the first time his eyes softened, almost childlike. "Thank you," he murmured. Then staring into the fire, he whispered again, "You don't know how much that means." And Clara realized whoever this man was, he wasn't running from something. He was running back to something he'd lost, and she was about to become part of that story. That night, the wind swept across the prairie like a whispering ghost, rattling the shutters and filling Clara's small cabin with the moan of loneliness. The stranger, still without a name, tossed restlessly on the cot near the fire. His sleep was uneasy, haunted. Clara sat at the table mending an old coat, though her eyes kept drifting toward him. Every so often he muttered in his sleep, fragments of words, broken phrases. "Eleanor, Charles, they took everything. Can't trust." His face twisted with pain, and Clara felt an ache deep in her chest that she didn't quite understand. She rose quietly, threw another log on the fire and studied him more closely. In the flickering glow, his features softened, almost noble. He didn't look like a criminal or a wanderer. He looked like a man who had fallen from grace. The faint scar near his temple, the dark circles beneath his eyes, they told a story of exhaustion, not evil. She wondered what kind of life he had fled. A lost love? A betrayal? A past too heavy to carry? Suddenly he gasped and sat upright, drenched in sweat, eyes wild. Clara stepped forward instinctively, hand hovering near his shoulder. "It's all right," she said gently. "You're safe." His breathing slowed, his gaze darting around before landing on her face. "Sorry," he muttered, rubbing his temples. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she replied softly. "But you were dreaming something fierce." He looked away, embarrassed, then gave a weak chuckle. "Yeah, dreams have a way of catching up to you even when you're running." Clara hesitated, then asked, "You been running long?" His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw the full weight of the sorrow he carried. "Too long," he whispered. "Sometimes I forget what I'm even running from." The words hung in the air, fragile as smoke. She sat beside the fire, close enough to feel his warmth, but not so close as to startle him. "Maybe it's not about what you're running from," she said quietly. "Maybe it's about what you're trying to find." Her words seemed to strike him deep. He stared at her for a long time, as if seeing her for the first time, not as a stranger, but as someone who understood the language of loss. He nodded slowly, his voice barely a breath. "Maybe you're right." Then softer, almost to himself, "Give me, I want the peace." And as the flames danced between them, Clara realized that for the first time, his plea wasn't for food or water, but for redemption.